Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave, on behalf of every father and every mother who waits for freedom, on behalf of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have an excellent show for you, but first, if you could, please hit the like and subscribe button. That'll really help us out, helps spread the word about the stream, helps notify you guys of any cool stuff we're doing. We had a great discussion about 2 weeks ago. It was a kind of an academic talk by some experts in the field on what they call the dronization of warfare, or just how different parts of the military are adapting to drone warfare at kind of a high level. So very interesting talk. We have it as a podcast on Spotify. We also have it on YouTube. So special little things like that. It's always good to subscribe so that you get notified when that happens. And of course, we always appreciate you guys spreading the word about our streams, either yourselves, by word of mouth, or also by liking each stream. That really recommends it to people on YouTube. We get dinged for violent stuff a lot just by showing explosions and things. So it really helps us that you guys support us. If you guys have any questions for us during the broadcast, we do our best. That's why one of the reasons we do it live is we try to take your questions, audience feedback, and take that into account, answer your stuff. So please do, if you have anything you want to ask us in the comments, if you're watching the video later, or in the chat if you're watching live, feel free to put your question. And we also have a website, Tochnyi.info. So it's a great website. I go there all the time. Check it out. Check out all the cool maps. There's a lot of great stuff, great information there. There's also a lot of interesting articles and just kind of like all of our, it's our central hub of all the Tochnyi research and stuff we do. So check out Tochnyi.info. So this week we have a cool show. We have first, of course, I'll present the news as always. We will get an extended German aid to Ukraine report from my colleague, which is going to be interesting. Then that will be followed by, I think we're going to have like a little Q&A jet. And then we will have finally a presentation from one of our economic contributors, Lorem Ipsum, and it'll be about the European rearmament and sort of the mechanisms, how that's going to be paid for, how that's going to be handled. So just covering kind of the current efforts by Europe to have this $800 billion rearmament plan. So all that being said, we're going to go ahead and start with the news. These are the main headlines as of April 6th, 2025. On the night of April 5th, Ukrainian drones reportedly struck the Promsyntez facility, one of Russia's major explosives manufacturing sites. The incident was reported by the Astra Telegram channel. The regional governor of Samara acknowledged the attack and confirmed an industrial site in the affected city had been targeted. According to Astra and corroborated by Ukrainian sources, the targeted facility was the plant. Ukrainian public broadcaster Suspilne, citing internal contacts with Ukraine's security apparatus, indicated that the operation was carried out by drones under the direction of the Ukrainian security service. Reports from these sources mention a series of around 20 explosions and multiple fires within the plant's grounds. The disruption was significant enough that ongoing production activities at the facility were halted. Located in Chapayevsk within the Samara region, the Promsyntez facility spans 190 hectares and includes 13 separate facilities. The plant specializes in manufacturing explosives, notably TNT, which is an essential component in the creation of munitions. It primarily supplies the mining sector, but its products are also relevant for military applications. Approximately 1,300 employees work at the plant, which operates with high levels of automation, especially in the more hazardous processes. Satellite images of the site revealed damages to at least 3 buildings and showed fire activity within containment areas designed to limit the spread of such incidents. A video accompanying the images provided further confirmation of the extent of the disruption caused by the drone operation. Also, authorities in Mordovia reported a drone strike on an industrial enterprise without naming a specific target. However, information circulated by Russian Telegram channel Baza identified the site as being owned by Fiber Optic Systems located in Saransk, the capital of Mordovia. The plant is recognized as Russia's sole domestic manufacturer of fiber optic components. These components are crucial in applications such as drones that are designed to resist electronic warfare interference, as well as in the construction of secure communications networks. The damage to the facility also poses a direct challenge to Russia's technological capabilities in military and communications domains. The fiber optics market in Russia has already experienced notable changes due to the ongoing war. Following the exit of US-based Corning from the Russian market, Chinese firms have filled the void, offering competitively priced alternatives. As of 2024, Chinese companies hold about 75% of the market, while fiber optic system share has dropped from 30% in 2021 to 25%. The recent strike threatens to further weaken the position of this already pressured domestic manufacturer. Russia has reportedly begun transferring North Korean long-range artillery systems into Crimea, according to the German broadcaster ZDF. This move suggests that Pyongyang's role in the conflict may be expanding beyond troop deployments near Russia's borders. A video dated March 26th appears to show North Korean Koksan self-propelled artillery units being transported by rail through northern Crimea. Until now, the North Korean military presence had only been confirmed in the Kursk region, where Moscow had been carrying out a counteroffensive since August of 2024. However, with Ukrainian forces having recently withdrawn from parts of Kursk, ZDF noted that Russian forces may now reposition North Korean personnel to Crimea to reinforce efforts in southern Ukraine. The weapons in transit, 170mm Koksan artillery systems, are known for their exceptional range. Standard shells can reach up to 40 kilometers, while rocket-assisted munitions can extend that range to around 60 kilometers. If deployed in the Zaporizhzhia region, which remains partly under Russian control, these guns could potentially be used to shell strategic urban centers such as Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. These artillery units had already seen action during the Kursk counteroffensive, where Ukrainian drone operations reportedly destroyed around 5 of them. Nevertheless, Pyongyang is believed to have delivered as many as 200 of these systems to Russia, offering a sizable reserve. Russian President Vladimir Putin has issued an order for the conscription of 160,000 men by mid-July, signaling a continued buildup of military manpower. This year's spring draft represents a notable increase from previous cycles, with 150,000 men called up in 2023 and 134,000 in 2022. Conscription in Russia occurs twice a year, targeting men aged 18 to 30. Authorities maintain that these conscripts are not deployed into combat, and the draft is separate from Russia's military campaign in Ukraine. Nonetheless, Ukraine has reported capturing conscripted Russian troops. The decree outlining the spring draft was made public last Monday. In addition to the current conscription efforts, Putin has set a broader goal to expand Russia's military force to 1.5 million active personnel by 2026, an increase of around 180,000 troops. As part of changes to the draft framework, the Kremlin raised the maximum conscription age from 27 to 30 in 2023. The spring's conscription period began on April 1st and will continue through July 15th. Up next, we have a lot of economy and aid news. I'll do my best to get through it. I'm just going to call this next section European Clutch Countries Come in Clutch. Denmark has officially approved its 25th military package for Ukraine, pledging 6.7 billion Danish kroner, which is approximately $1 billion, and is to be distributed over the period from 2025 to 2027. The latest package includes a targeted allocation of around $200 million earmarked for artillery systems and the transfer of munitions through collaborative initiatives with allied nations. Beyond artillery, the aid will bolster air defense capabilities, support for the development of drone technologies, and continued enhancements to Ukraine's IT infrastructure. Additionally, a significant portion, around $290 million, has been designated for the 2026 and 2027 years to help build up Ukraine's domestic defense industry. Also, on Monday, the Swedish government announced a substantial increase in military assistance to Ukraine, amounting to 16 billion Swedish kroner, approximately $1.6 billion. This allocation is part of a response to Ukraine's request for enhanced capabilities in several areas, including air defense, artillery, satellite communications, and maritime support. This latest commitment is Sweden's largest to date, bringing the total aid provided to Ukraine in 2025 to 29.5 billion kroner, with cumulative aid reaching 80 billion kroner since 2022, about $8 billion. I'm liking that easy Swedish kroner math. Sweden's Minister for Defense, Paul Johnson, emphasized the urgency of amplifying support given the critical situation and urged other nations to support Ukraine. He also stated that some funds originally designated for 2026 will be redirected to meet immediate needs. Approximately 9.2 billion kroner of the aid will be utilized by the Swedish Defense Material Administration to procure and donate critical equipment to Ukraine and ensure rapid delivery. The planned support includes artillery systems, air defense equipment, small combat vessels, and military hardware. Sweden also intends to provide around 500 million kroner worth of assistance from its own military stocks, including machine guns and ammunition of smaller calibers. More than 5 billion kroner will be distributed through various funds and coalitions focused on acquiring necessary equipment for Ukraine. Janssen mentioned that around 70% of the new aid is expected to be delivered within the year 2025. Also, the Netherlands has committed 500 million euros to a new drone production initiative aimed at supporting Ukraine's defense capabilities amid the ongoing invasion. This investment is part of a broader accelerated support package totaling 2 billion euros that the Dutch government plans to deliver in 2025. The announcement was made during a visit to Ukraine by the Dutch Defense Minister Ruben Brekelmans and the State Secretary for Defense. The officials emphasized that the drone project will serve a vital role in Ukraine's battlefield operations, which will improve both strategic and tactical effectiveness while helping to save lives. Also, we already discussed this a bit last week, but it was officially confirmed this week that Norwegian officials will significantly increase assistance to Ukraine in 2025. The finance minister and defense minister announced that the Norwegian Council of State has approved an expanded support package following internal discussions. The new package amounts to around 4.6 billion US dollars, which will be added to the previously committed amount. This brings Norway's total pledged aid to around 7.8 billion US dollars. The finance minister Jens Stoltenberg, that name sounds familiar, highlighted that a major portion of this expanded aid will go towards strengthening military support, stating that Norway intends to triple its defense assistance as part of a broader commitment. Czechia has officially confirmed that Ukraine will receive steady monthly shipments of ammunition through the autumn of 2025, thanks to a Czech-led initiative that allows allied countries to collectively fund weapons purchases on the global market. According to the Czech foreign minister, the long-term success of the effort depends largely on contributions from partner nations, including Canada, Norway, the Netherlands, and Denmark. Isn't Germany in there? Well, maybe ask my buddy. Their financial support has ensured the initiative's stability, enabling a predictable flow of munitions to Ukraine's forces during a critical period. The Czech foreign minister reported that the initiative has had a major impact on the battlefield. He stated that the balance of firepower between the Russian and Ukrainian artillery units has shifted significantly. Where Ukrainian forces previously faced a severe disadvantage, outgunned 10-1, this has now improved to around 2-1. He further pointed out that Czech industry has played a major role in helping these efforts, having delivered 1.5 million artillery shells to Ukraine in 2024, including approximately 500,000 large caliber rounds, specifically 155 and 152 millimeter shells. Cool, so that's it for the clutch countries coming in clutch. Hope you guys have noticed a pattern from week to week there. Those are all the regulars, huh? Moving on. On April 1st, the European Commission disbursed a new 3.5 billion euro tranche to Ukraine as part of the ongoing Ukraine Facility Program. The announcement was made by Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, who emphasized that the funding will contribute toward preserving macroeconomic stability amid the ongoing invasion. The program is a broader financial support mechanism designed to assist Ukraine in its recovery and integration process with the European Union. The latest disbursement brings the total amount of financial assistance under the Ukraine facility to 19.6 billion euros. According to Economy Minister Yulia Sverdenko, the latest funds include 3.1 billion euros in concessional loans and 400 million in direct grants. The allocation is intended to support critical budget needs and key public spending priorities. The funding followed Ukraine's successful implementation of the Ukraine Plan's benchmarks for the fourth quarter of 2024. These include 13 specific targets, such as progress in digital governance, aligning national laws with EU standards, and reinforcing the country's energy independence. Sverdenko noted that Ukraine met all 36 reform indicators set for 2024, marking the first time in the nation's history that a full year's reform targets were completed. The government now aims to build on this momentum in 2025 and meet a total of 56 new reform indicators. Also, Ukraine has received a $400 million installment from the International Monetary Fund as part of the Extended Facility Fund. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal announced this on March 31st. The latest disbursement follows the IMF Executive Board's approval after completing the program's seventh review on March 29th. The IMF also addressed Ukraine's monetary policy, advising the national bank to be prepared to act if inflationary expectations begin to rise. In response to inflation exceeding expectations, reaching 12% in 2024, the central bank recently increased its key interest rate from 14.5% to 15.5%. Russia's federal budget deficit reached 3.8 trillion rubles, around $44 billion during the first 2 months of 2025, exceeding the finance ministry's earlier projection of 2.7 trillion rubles, roughly $31 billion, according to data released from the Federal Treasury and reported by Interfax. During this period, federal revenues totaled approximately $45.9 billion, falling well short of the $62.3 billion initially estimated by the finance ministry. Meanwhile, expenditures were slightly lower than expected, amounting to $91.3 billion compared to the projected 94. The significant gap in revenue figures is less than forecasted and a major reason behind the anticipated deficit. The finance ministry explained that its preliminary estimates have included payments to the unified tax account, which were technically recognized as revenue on March 1st. Since the final tax payment day fell on Friday, February 28th, some transactions may not have been completed, and this resulted in a discrepancy between the projected figures and the ultimately reported ones, which were worse. This next section I just call Various Russian Economic News. A group of 24 high net worth individuals previously identified as Russian nationals are now listed under different countries in the latest Forbes Global Billionaire ranking, with their combined wealth totaling approximately $110 billion. This change reflects a broader trend of Russian oligarchs rebranding their international identities, largely in response to mounting geopolitical pressures and business restrictions on Russians. Notable among them is Alexei Kuzmichev, the co-founder of Alpha Group, who is now listed as a French national with an estimated fortune of $7.5 billion. Peter Avan, formerly president of Alpha Bank, is now ranked as a Latvian billionaire with $4.7 billion, and Yelena Baturina, founder of Inteco and widow of former Moscow mayor Yuri Luzhkov, is identified as a British businesswoman with a net worth of $1.3 billion. Switzerland has emerged as a favored destination for many individuals. Mikhail Prokhov is worth $10.7 billion, Yegor Kulkov, $4.1 billion, and the Fartushnyaki brothers, Vladimir and Nikolai, who are all currently residing there. What are those two up to? Other prominent figures have associated themselves with various jurisdictions. Andrei Melchenko, worth $17.4 billion, is now tied to the United Arab Emirates. Alisher Usmanov, whose wealth stands at $16.7 billion, is listed under Uzbekistan, and Dmitry Rybolovlev, worth $6.4 billion, now claims Monaco citizenship. Russia's manufacturing sector experienced its sharpest downturn in nearly 3 years in March, reflecting growing pressure from weakening demand both domestically and abroad. According to data from S&P Global, the country's Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, or PMI, fell to 48.2, a significant drop from 50.2 in February and a steep decline from January's stronger reading of 53.1. A PMI below 50 indicates contraction, and this marked the first such decline since September 2024 and the most severe decline to date since April 2022. The downturn comes amid broader concerns about the state of Russia's economy. Since August 2024, the central bank has anticipated a slowdown, implementing various regulatory measures, not focused on interest rates, to cool the economy and tame inflation, which hit 9.9% in January. These steps have started to weigh on economic activity, with both manufacturing and services showing signs of stress. The drop in the PMI was driven by a clear reduction in output and new orders, signaling deteriorating business conditions. Output fell sharply, ending a 4-month period of growth, and the decline was steepest since July 2022. New orders, a key indicator of future production, also declined for the first time since October of the previous year. Export sales decreased as well, intensifying an overall slump in demand. In response, manufacturers have cut back on the purchasing of raw materials, choosing to deplete their inventories instead. S&P Global noted that this decline in input buying was the most significant since August 2022. Supply chain pressures, while significantly improved, continue to face setbacks due to ongoing delays in logistics and rail transport. The report covers a lot of issues, including increased business confidence in Russia, but in summary, the data points to a mounting strain on Russia's industrial base, as lower demand and persistent logistical issues are a drag on performance. Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a decree placing Nizhpharm, a leading pharmaceutical producer in Russia, under temporary state control. The move targets the entire shareholding held by Nida Links SARL, a Luxembourg-registered entity owned by German pharmaceutical group Stada. According to Russian media outlet The Bell, the state-appointed administrator of the seized asset is Pharmarus, a relatively young Russian company specializing in pharmaceutical distribution. Nijpharm, founded in 1919, is among the oldest drug manufacturers in Russia. Stada became the controlling shareholder in 2004, and following the outbreak of the full-scale invasion, the company's Russian operations were consolidated under its Luxembourg subsidiary. Market data from DSM Group shows that Nijpharm was the second highest in retail pharmaceutical sales in Russia in 2024 in ruble terms, holding 3.7% of the market. This takeover comes amid official Russian claims that numerous foreign firms are interested in resuming business with Russia. However, to date, no companies from countries labeled as unfriendly by Moscow have taken any formal steps to return to the Russian market. Also, Russia's stock market experienced its most severe weekly decline in over 2 years, triggered by a combination of global economic shocks, including new sweeping tariffs announced by U.S. President Donald Trump and a sharp fall in oil prices. Over just 2 trading days, the total market value of companies listed on the Moscow exchange dropped by 2 trillion rubles, or approximately 23.7 billion US dollars, as market capitalization fell from 55 trillion rubles on Wednesday to 53 trillion rubles by Friday's close. The Russia Index, which tracks 43 of the country's largest publicly traded firms, recorded a weekly loss of 8.5%, marking its worst performance since September of 2022. The previous downturn followed the Kremlin's announcement of mass mobilization during the war in Ukraine. By the end of Friday's trading session, major companies saw significant losses. Sberbank declined by around 5%, Gazprom by around 5%, VTB by 6%, Rosneft by 4%, Lukoil by 5%, and Aeroflot by 5%. Financial experts are warning that the unfolding market collapse is part of a broader global downturn. JP Morgan analysts raised the likelihood of a worldwide recession to 60% in light of the newly imposed U.S. tariffs. These trade measures have pushed down prices for key commodities, with Brent crude losing 12% in just 2 days to briefly touch $64 a barrel, the lowest price since April of 2021. Copper futures also dropped by 11%. The financial situation on the Russian stock exchange has deteriorated sharply since mid-February, with the index losing around 17% of its value. Oh, and that's all the financial stuff this week. Next, we have international relations. European intelligence agencies are investigating a series of coordinated parcel explosions that occurred in the summer of 2024, with growing evidence pointing to involvement by Russia's GRU, the country's military intelligence services. The incidents took place at parcel delivery facilities in the UK, Germany, and Poland. One of the packages which failed to detonate was intercepted at a warehouse in Warsaw. According to a source familiar with the investigation, the parcels were disguised as harmless shipments containing items such as cosmetics and adult products. Hidden within the packages, however, were improvised explosive devices concealed inside pillows. The devices used a mixture of reactive chemicals, including magnesium, and were set off by rudimentary detonators adapted from inexpensive consumer electronics typically used as tracking devices. Investigators found that the detonation effect was intensified by fake cosmetic products, which instead contained a gel with flammable materials, including nitromethane, a substance often used in racing fuels and explosives. These devices were built to be inconspicuous yet capable of causing serious damage upon activation. Authorities in Poland are pursuing criminal proceedings based on both classified intelligence and the testimonies of 5 individuals believed to be part of a coordinated sabotage operation. Among the suspects is Vladislav Derkovets, a Ukrainian citizen. Derkovets allegedly received instruction through the encrypted messaging app Telegram from an individual using the alias Warrior, who had been introduced to him by an acquaintance. In mid-2024, Derkovets traveled to Lithuania, where he reportedly assembled 4 parcels containing the explosive components and set timers before handing them off to another operative in a public park in Vilnius. According to the source, this handoff was confirmed using a prearranged code word. He was arrested in August of 2024 and is currently being held on suspicion of carrying out acts of sabotage at the direction of Russian intelligence. He denies any wrongdoing. Another individual implicated in the case is Alexander Bezurukovi, a 44-year-old Russian national. Investigators allege that his role was to coordinate an attack on cargo flights bound for North America. He was reportedly tasked with sending parcels containing shoes and clothing from Warsaw to destinations such as Washington and Ottawa. like Derkovets, Bezrukovi denies the accusations. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukraine is preparing for negotiations on a minerals agreement with the United States and emphasized that the deal must be based in fairness and a sense of partnership. To ensure proper representation during the talks, Ukraine is in the process of selecting a legal firm to assist with the negotiations. According to Zelensky, 3 leading law firms have expressed interest and willingness to represent Ukraine, and discussions are ongoing to determine a final choice. A decision is expected early next week. Zelensky said that a meeting with the Ukrainian negotiating team is scheduled for the beginning of the week, during which he will be briefed on the essential aspects of the agreement. Once the legal representation is finalized and the review of the draft agreement is complete, Ukraine's technical team will be prepared to travel to the United States for direct talks with their American counterparts. Zelensky confirmed that this technical delegation will lead discussions for now, and that he himself currently does not plan to visit the U.S. in connection with the negotiations. Also, President Zelensky has instructed the Security Service of Ukraine to launch an investigation into the unauthorized disclosure of the U.S. mineral deal. The probe follows the emergence of sensitive details about the deal into the public domain, reportedly sparking diplomatic tensions between Kyiv and the administration of the U.S. According to sources cited by the Financial Times, the leaked draft included provisions that Ukrainian officials found politically unacceptable, particularly concerning potential U.S. profits from Ukraine's strategic infrastructure. The SSU investigation includes the use of polygraph testing, a method commonly used in law enforcement and national security vetting. The Financial Times reported that several ministries were involved in the questioning process, and staff members underwent lie detector tests in an effort to identify the source of the leak. Officials familiar with the inquiry declined to disclose how many individuals had been tested or the specific agencies involved. The investigation was reportedly triggered after the opposition lawmaker Yaroslav Zheleznak publicly revealed details of the proposal on March 26, claiming that he had obtained a copy. The president's office has not yet commented on the matter, while the SSU has stated that it operates strictly within the bounds of national law and doesn't publicly disclose details of its operations. And last item for this week, the United States is waiting for feedback from Russian negotiator Kirill Dmitriev to President Vladimir Putin before determining its next steps in ongoing peace talks. Dmitriev, who heads the Russian Direct Investment Fund, held meetings with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in Washington earlier this week. His visit came among heightened tensions as President Trump expressed growing frustration with the lack of progress in negotiations. Trump has recently threatened to impose what he called secondary tariffs on Russian oil. According to Bloomberg, U.S. officials are increasingly dissatisfied with what they perceive as delays from Moscow. An apparent breakthrough in talks last week, centered on a partial ceasefire in the Black Sea, collapsed shortly after Russian negotiators claimed it was dependent on sanctions relief, a condition that was not mentioned in the U.S. version of the proposal. Dmitriev's meetings in Washington on April 2nd and 3rd were conducted as part of his role representing Putin in foreign economic matters. After the talks, he described the Trump administration's approach as constructive and respectful, and noted an interest on both sides in restoring and expanding bilateral relations, including in the economic sphere. Dmitriev has previously served as a key figure in informal U.S.-Russia dialogue. He was involved in back-channel communication during Trump's initial election period in 2016 and has played a continuing role in diplomatic outreach. Earlier this year, he took part in preliminary U.S.-Russian discussions in Saudi Arabia. And that's it for the main headlines this week. We will now move to the next segment.
Yeah, and that would be me. Hello, guys. As always, I will now present this week's most important news from Germany regarding to Ukraine. And as Joseph already said, it's a little bit extended, so hopefully you like it. On Tuesday, actually, not Thursday, like I wrote, on Tuesday, Germany's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Annalena Baerbock, made a surprise visit to Ukraine. During her 9th visit to Ukraine since Russia launched its brutal war of aggression against Ukraine, she pledged another 130 million euros in humanitarian assistance and stabilization funds. In one of her press statements, she said, among other things, that Putin is only simulating a willingness to negotiate and that we must not allow ourselves to be blinded by him. This is also why it is important to be in Ukraine right now and to make it clear that also the next German government will continue to provide massive support for Ukraine. And we have seen about, if I recall correctly, 2 weeks ago or something, we approved another something around 11 billion euros in military assistance. So definitely not just words. A day later, the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development announced that as a result of the lack of US aid funding, it is now forced to reallocate its own funding for projects related to Ukraine. It was also stated that EU funds are also affected by these changes. In total, about 100 million euros will now have to be spent on the procurement of urgently needed equipment and the repairs of substations at the request of the state-owned electricity transmission system operator Ukrenergo. These German and EU funds were originally earmarked for other modernizations and repairs to Ukraine's electricity grid and are now missing. On Thursday, preliminary figures, well, hard word for a German, holy. On arms exports in the first quarter of this year have been released by the German government. In total, arms exports worth around 1.47 billion euros were approved, while more than 573 million euros, which is around 39%, were intended for Ukraine. Ukraine, therefore, once again is the largest recipient country of German arms by far. The German Ministry of Defense announced on Friday that Germany alone plans to provide around 500,000 of the total 2 million artillery shells that the EU intends to supply to Ukraine within 2025. According to publicly available information, Germany has already delivered 92,000 of the 500,000 shells this year, consisting of 23,000 122 high explosive shells and 69,000 155 high explosive shells. Deliveries are therefore already well progressed and will once again significantly exceed last year's deliveries. If I recall correctly, we delivered something like 340,000 artillery shells last year, so a huge increase. And last but not least, on the same day, Reuters published a story about Eutelsat in Germany. I really hope that company gets spelled that name. I didn't look it up before, sorry. Apparently Eutelsat has provided Ukraine with its high-speed satellite internet for about a year now, while the German government has secretly paid for the about 1,000 terminals connecting Ukrainian users. According to Eutelsat chief executive Eva Bernecke, the company and the German government are currently in negotiations about increasing the Ukrainian network to up to 10,000 terminals, so a tenfold increase, with the German government once again covering the cost. And that's already it for my segment, for my extended segment. So back to you, Joseph.
Nice. Well, thank you for that. Now we have what I call extra bits. These are the things that didn't quite make it into my news report, but still seem kind of important. So I just try to bring them up, see if anyone has anything to say about them. So the first is the mineral deal and what I would call the different messaging about the mineral deal. So if you ask the U.S., so I already talked about what Ukraine's doing. Ukraine has pretty much made very clear, like, they're totally open to negotiating the deal and they want to negotiate it properly. And they're going to send like a technical team and they're going to like hire a law firm to represent them. I assume the reason they're doing that is because it seems like the U.S. side is pretty insistent that certain things fall under U.S. law. And I think Ukraine has finally just decided, like, fine, we'll look into that, but we need to hire a law firm now. So that seems to be Ukraine's position. It's like, we're open to it. We're gonna like go negotiate in good faith. The U.S. position, or at least like I should say, every statement coming out of the U.S. is like, the deal's on the table. They need to just take it or not. Like, we're not negotiating here. Like, they've already dragged this out, something like that. So it's, I don't know, just no, they haven't, neither side has officially acknowledged the discrepancy between their messaging, but it seems to me that, like, I don't know, like, obviously the deal won't be made by you without Ukraine. So like, the US is just being maybe a bit pushy with it and just trying to get Ukraine to sign it. But to me, it was just notable that there was a real difference in messaging between the U.S. and the Ukrainian side. I don't know. I feel like, well, I guess, like, do either of you guys have anything you want to say about the mineral stuff going on this week?
No, not really, no.
Yeah, I think that's about the size of it. I mean, if I see something more definitive, I'll let everyone know. But that's kind of what I picked up on the mineral deal. Okay, and then the next item I have was the Trump administration in the U.S. Basically, as far as I understand, accidentally sent notices to a large number of Ukrainians who are in the U.S. on a specific humanitarian program, basically they said like, you're no longer legally in the United States. You need to come turn yourself in, or like, quote, we will find you. So yeah, they basically just freaked out a bunch of people who, are Ukrainian refugees. And then they sent a second email that they informed them that the order was a mistake. There was like a little bit of talk about a judge like reversing it or something. So it was a little unclear to me whether or not there was ever any intention to do it, and like whether the mistake was like the legal issue itself, or whether they just did it completely by accident. All that being said, as far as everyone has said it was a mistake. So that's as much as I can say about it. I would say not that important in the grand scheme of things, but just kind of a crazy thing to happen to a bunch of unfortunate people who have been through enough in their lives. The next item is the comments by Mr. Cavoli. Mr. Cavoli is the head of NATO forces in Europe, commander of forces of Europe and NATO, something like. Colby will tell us what he really is ranked as.
Supreme Allied Commander Europe and Commander U.S. European Command.
Yeah, thank you, Colby. That sounds way better. Yeah, he had a testimony in front of Congress this week. Again, Colby will correct me if that's not right. But basically, he made some comments about what's going on in Ukraine. He's a very, I would say, knowledgeable and I don't know, like he's someone we should probably listen to when it comes to this stuff. So I just wanted to like cover just like broadly what he said, and then we'll have Colby, I think you probably listen to it in detail, maybe cover anything I missed. So basically he said, I'm just going to go through the bullet points, that both Russia and Ukraine have experienced really intense equipment losses, particularly Russia. But of course, the nature of the scale of the war has caused really massive attrition. Russia has ramped up production. So despite these losses, Russia have significantly increased their production capabilities to produce tanks, armored vehicles, and missiles. Ukraine has effectively used different weapon systems and adapted with technology, including drones and other technological advancements that have allowed them to stay competitive. U.S. support and innovations have helped Ukraine with things like drones, things like, I don't know, like basically US technology has helped, and that we are adapting our own strategies based on Ukraine's experience. And then the US is applying the lessons, and they're trying to modernize US forces. And that he thinks that the main lessons that should be taken are using drones, electronic warfare capabilities, and making those capabilities part of like smaller, more flexible units in the US military. He thinks that's kind of what the lesson of the Ukraine war is, or I shouldn't call it the Ukraine war, the Russian invasion is. So yeah, that's, I think, a summary of it. Colby, did you want to add anything about what General Cavoli said?
He did say an awful lot. I mean, it was a lengthy hearing that was held on Thursday with himself and also the commander of U.S. Africa Command. It was a hearing on their posture and their budget request for the next fiscal year in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee. So quite a lot was discussed. I think you highlighted a few interesting things there. I certainly am not in a position to give a summary of everything else that was said, but I did call out a couple things myself during the hearing that he had said. He had made some comments about the Czech initiative and had stated that this month Czechia is going to deliver, I believe it was 80,000 155 shells this month, which is interesting because of that hold, and that'll be definitely a notable increase over the amount that was delivered cumulatively last year. Last year, there was 1.5 million large caliber rounds delivered, of which a third, 500,000, were 155. So if they are able to maintain that pace, then we might see that figure for 155 exceeded this year. He also made some comments about how ATACMS strikes on Russian territory have been extremely effective, and said that he could elaborate on that when they went into the closed classified hearing. But that that was obviously notable since we heard for years on end that those the ATACMS were not going to be useful for Ukraine at all, and not useful for striking Russia. And now Colby said the opposite, which is obviously evident to anybody with a brain. But we heard lots of nonsense from the Biden administration and a lot of so-called analysts, military analysts, OSINT analysts, who are repeating that nonsense. So we have Colby contradicting that, and I will conclude by saying that I will probably be highlighting a few other things from Colby on Monday. So our audience should stay tuned for a possible thread on Monday morning with a couple other tidbits.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So yeah, stay tuned for any extra stuff. But yeah, I think it was a good discussion. One of the I don't know, he's a very knowledgeable guy. He understands. I think his job is to basically understand the big picture of what's going on with the security situation in Europe. So yeah, I don't know. I think he's worth his analysis is worth checking out. If you felt like we didn't give you a good summary, then go listen yourself. He also covered a lot of stuff beyond just Ukraine, I would say. So yeah, I don't know, probably worth checking out, even just the remarks themselves. Cool. Mr. Germany, you don't have anything you want to mention about Colby, do you?
No, the only thing I want to say, because you already mentioned it in the news bit, and now the SEC ammunition initiative was brought up once again, just to highlight why Germany wasn't mentioned along the countries. In 2024, we financed 180,000 155 shells over the SEC ammunition initiative, which was the biggest share among all nations contributing to the initiative. However, for this year, and that's why Germany wasn't mentioned so far, we didn't have the funds yet. And these were, the budget was basically completely bound so far, the 4 billion euros, which why we couldn't make any contributions for this year. This has now been resolved. There haven't been any announcements yet, but I completely expect Germany to contribute again. I mean, last year, if I recall correctly, the Czech ammunition initiative actually made up more than 50% of the German deliveries. And that's pretty insane when you think that we are not contributing this year once again, right? So yeah, the only thing I wanted to say.
Yeah, it's a good point. I did mention that in the report, the news report, what was going on with that. So yeah, it's a good clarification. And yeah, thanks Germany for helping with that program. It's a great program. We're also talking a little bit in the private chat. I think there was mention of this. I'm familiar with it too. The Czechs have said that the program is good until September. And my understanding is like they know they've got shells coming in every month until September. After that, there might be more shells, there might not be. They just can't guarantee it. But Colby, you're talking about some elections and stuff. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I haven't seen any information about them saying that there wouldn't be shells left to buy after September. I don't believe that would be true necessarily, but perhaps I haven't seen that reporting. But Czechia is having an election in September, and currently the incumbent government is not favored in the polls. So if there was a change in government and the opposition wins, a number of the opposition leaders have suggested that they would be canceling military aid to Ukraine. So there is definitely some risk that the Czech initiative may not continue after those elections, or once a hypothetical new government can be formed. And that may take some time, because coalition negotiations in Europe often take some time before a new government actually comes in following elections. But that is a risk, and I've highlighted this point in articles for the Insider in the past. But there are alternatives. There are other countries that have their own initiatives to source ammunition on the global market. The UK has been doing this for some time. Estonia has their own initiative doing basically the same thing. The United States as well has sourced non-standard ammunition for Ukraine through from various sources in the past as well. So there are alternatives if the Czech initiative ceases. So the bottom line is it's important for donor countries to continue making money available for this purpose, and also contributing more budgetary support to the Ukrainians, just so that they can procure what they need on their own behalf, because the Ukrainian industry is capable of producing quite a bit, but the Ukrainian government hasn't had funds to do that. And we're hearing that will hopefully change this year, so that the budgetary support coming into Ukraine will actually be adequate for them to all of their industrial output put on contract for the Ukrainian armed forces. And the Ukrainians, of course, have their own bilateral efforts to source ammunition from different places. So all of these funding mechanisms are very important, in addition to just what countries are trying to source from their own stockpiles or their own industries. Giving this budgetary support to Ukraine is very important. And then these efforts to buy ammunition from third parties around the world are very important.
Yeah, I just want to mention, I have heard what you said about the election and maybe they cancel the program. I've heard that before. But as far as I understood it, and from what I've heard and read, it's actually meant the way Joseph said, that they're basically have no more to fund after that. But I just seen the statement and from the Czech foreign minister, who recently said that this initiative, and I'm quoting him, now has enough resources to provide ammunition on a monthly basis to Ukraine till September. So that was his statement. So if I understood him correctly, the money they have right now grants deliveries until September. Maybe if they receive more funding, there will be deliveries after September, if the initiative doesn't get cancelled. That's how I understand it now.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, certainly to to my point. I mean, they need more funding so that it can continue, and they may have designed it such that the funding would be available to September because they know that there's an election then anyway, and so there's not really any point in trying to set up deliveries beyond September, because those might not happen if they have this change in government. But
Yeah, like whether they're directly related or not, I think that's still good context that you gave, Colby. Like this election's happening, and then also that there's other alternatives, even if the Czech initiative itself, isn't the center of gravity, right? So I don't know. I think whether or not that statement is related to the stuff you were talking about isn't like as important as like all of this matters, right?
Yeah, actually have a question for Colby in this regard. You mentioned Estonia, and I also recall people saying, and also Estonian officials saying that they could fund also ammunition for Ukraine from sources. Do you know if they are the same sources basically as Czechia has, or is it different sources? Because then, of course, we could just, as you said, just switch to another country during the negotiations, right?
yeah, so I think that there's probably some overlap in the sources. I don't have an exhaustive list of, in either case, what the source countries are for both Czechia and Estonia. So certainly there's going to likely be some overlap. There may be some countries that are different. But I mean, we're all sort of familiar with the various sources. India's obviously one. You have countries like Serbia, obviously, that we know produce a lot of different types of ammunition, and that's been getting purchased by different countries, and it's going to Ukraine. The UK was sourcing ammunition from Pakistan. So there's a long list of different countries.
Bulgaria, right?
Bulgaria, certainly, yeah. Turkey, would be another one. There's others, and I have details that I won't be sharing right now. But yeah, there's a lot of different countries.
But like it's more or less a global market, right? And like the market's kind of tight anyway right now. So I'm guessing, like you said, it's probably kind of, Estonia goes to them or Czechia goes to them. It's aside from maybe certain nuances, pretty straightforward, yeah.
Yeah, I think that if the Czech initiative ceases, I don't believe that there would be any source that would necessarily just be off the table, where like, oh well, we were willing to deal with the Czechs, but we're not going to deal with those other guys. I think it's really like, if you're willing to pay, then the ammunition is there. And yeah, a lot of this is getting definitely acquired at a premium, I think, because the demand is so high, and these countries are in a position to dictate pretty generous pricing for themselves. But that's just the reality. So, you know, it's definitely expensive to source ammunition this way. It would be a lot cheaper in the long run to just invest in domestic production, but that takes time, obviously. And for whatever reason, just most European countries are still not really willing to really put really big money behind this. Germany has put a decent amount of money towards Rheinmetall getting their production up, but overall, we're seeing still pretty modest investments in the grand scheme of things on the part of the EU as a whole, and just individually what different member states are willing to do. It's all quite modest. I mean, the ASAP program is really just a joke, really, in the amount of money that is made available for this purpose. So Europe is really paying a premium either way, whether because their own production costs are just so much higher in the continent. For a lot of different reasons, they can't produce ammunition nearly as cheaply as the United States can, and procuring it is expensive. But there's no option. I mean, this is what has to be done to ensure that Ukraine has the ammunition they need. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we all understand this is astronomically cheaper than it would be if Ukraine loses, and then we all have to fight Russia ourselves. So it's still very much a bargain, but everybody still wants to have their cake and eat it too, unfortunately.
And I just want to add that you said in the long run, it would be cheaper to buy domestically or expand the production capacity. I just want to highlight and point out that in the short term, actually, it's much cheaper to buy via the Czech ammunition initiative. I mean, we have when we compare to Rheinmetall, right, to Rheinmetall prices, and of course they are currently expanding their production lines, buying a building in Unterlüß, of course, a completely new factory, which costs a shit ton of money, if I can say it. But it's actually much more expensive for us to right now buy domestically and not buy in via the Czech initiative. We know that the shells, the 155 shells from the Czech initiative, cost 3,200 euros per shell. And the new prices, if I recall correctly, for Rheinmetall shells are 4,600 per shell. So we're paying a lot, like 1,400 euros more per shell when we're buying from Rheinmetall compared to the second initiative.
I will say two things. Number one, I think that like Colby's point, and part of it is that like you said, it's a short-term solution that does make sense. Like the first year they did it, it made obvious sense. And this year it still makes sense, but like each year it makes a little less sense. Like, oh yeah. And I think, there's like two reasons. The one, though, I would just say is like, I think even though the German shell is more, it's probably higher quality than like an Indian shell. I'm just,
Oh yeah.
both higher quality. Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing that's getting lost as well, is that, you have to consider what the actual effectiveness of the product is, right? And this is something that gets lost when we talk about Russian production. Like, oh, look how many more shells the Russians are producing. But like, what is the quality of those shells? A 155, like an M795 from the United States is significantly more effective than probably several 152s from Russia. Just because the Russian shells are poor quality, right? That has to be taken into account when we're talking about cost, because the absolute cost isn't really what's the most relevant thing. It's the cost effectiveness of the ammunition on the battlefield. So that's kind of a point against the Czech initiative, because you're paying a lot of money to buy a lot of ammunition that is not of great quality, but you have to take what you can get. So it is more cost effective to invest in your domestic production and produce higher quality ammunition. But that there's lead time there, obviously, as GAU was saying, to invest in all these new factories. And Rheinmetall has built some facilities relatively quickly, but it still takes time, and it's not instantaneous. Whereas a lot of this ammunition is, can be sourced more quickly. So bottom line is, both are important. A lot more money needs to be invested in both to both fulfill Ukraine's short-term needs and ensure that in the long term there's sustainable supplies of ammunition for Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the issue right now, as you correctly pointed out, is there is pretty decent traction on the short term, and Germany is doing good on the medium and long term. But like other European countries need to step up. I would say the Nordic countries or Scandinavian countries, whatever. I don't know. I don't get mad, whatever. But like Finland, Sweden, and Norway and Denmark are doing their best, I think, to raise production to a certain degree. But it took them a while, and we just need to see like more activity from more European countries on this front. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Norway is a classic example just because they're so filthy rich that they were in a position to go a lot further, a lot bigger, a lot faster. But their investments, again, they're very, very modest given all of these different considerations, what they are doing. So there's good things happening, but again, the scale is just not in adequate proportion to what it should be given the security threat that is facing the continent. So that's problematic. France is another very good example of a country that is, supposedly co-leading the artillery capability coalition, but the investments that Nexter is making into their ammunition production are just so small, like just a joke, really. I mean, they've invested quite a bit into the production of barrels and ramping up production of their Caesar howitzers, but on the ammunition side, it's peanuts, really. So it's just not really serious. Poland, another country that is investing so much in their armed forces, but is really just has struggled mightily to try and establish their own robust conventional artillery ammunition production. And they are uniquely positioned in that they're like one of the few countries in the world that, still had active TNT production. So Nitrochem in Poland is supplying the TNT requirements for a lot of the United States and a lot of other countries' needs, but they've been unable to really get their own NATO standard ammunition production established. So across the continent, Rheinmetall is the only firm that is really ramping up quite significantly. BAE as well in the UK, seems to be ramping up, or at least they say they're ramping up substantially. But they don't reveal any of their production figures, so we really don't know exactly. I view it all very skeptically. And this is something that just needs Europe needs to just stop being so secretive about all of this, and just be transparent about what their production is, like the United States, because we're all just playing guessing games, wondering what the other guy is doing, and it's not helpful to the effort.
Yeah, and I think that already answers the question of Mitch, right? I don't think, like Colby just mentioned, I don't think there are a lot of companies or countries who are doing as much as Germany in terms of ramping up artillery production. I mean, before the war, Rheinmetall was at their own statement like 70,000 artillery shells capacity. Right now, they're at, the latest was 750,000, right, Colby?
Somewhere in that ballpark, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you have to imagine with the prices, right? Rheinmetall bought Expal for, it was 1.5 billion, 1.4 billion euros, I think. They built a new production line, a new factory with explosive production and all kinds of things. Rocket motors, I believe, also, right? Which is a triple-digit million in investment. They ramp up production in all of their sites. Triple shift system, blah blah blah. And this all investments, which cost them billions of euros. Of course, the prices are rising after that. I mean, they have to, somehow get that money back in. I don't think that any company would invest over €1 billion, maybe 2 billion euros, I don't know, and say, okay, but the prices are staying the same. It's fine. Like, just my opinion. So I don't think that Germany has a denial of war coming to them. I don't think, like, speaking or hearing persons from the political sphere, from the Bundeswehr, from the defense industry in special, because they are making money of this. Of course, they are aware of this. Nobody's really denying that a war could be closer to us or happen sooner than we might think. And I think Germany compared, and especially the German defense industry compared to, for example, the French one, as Colby mentioned, makes a lot of adult decisions. And just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we're trying to give credit where it's due here. We look at numbers, and as Colby said, sometimes the numbers aren't available, so we just try to go by what evidence does exist. And I think Colby mentioned like consummate with the security threat they're facing. And I think that's maybe a good way to like put a bow on this, right? And you guys can comment on this, but like one of the reasons we're talking about this so much and we take it so seriously, and we're really urging Europe to take this more seriously, is because Russia is taking this very seriously. Russia has ramped up their production. We have seen definite evidence of that. They're at a very fundamental level, at the very base levels of the supply chain. They are literally building more fertilizer plants to make more explosives, to make more, shells, to make more, they are taking this very seriously, and they will be producing more. It's not going to be super high quality like what Europe can produce, but it's Russia, right? So that's I think the reason we are really ringing the alarm bells on this issue, and we have for so long, is because we see evidence every day that Russia absolutely is taking this seriously and is increasing their production, and this will be an issue for Europe for, I don't know, the next decade at least.
Yeah, I mean, to bring this back to what Cavoli was saying in the hearing, is that like Russians are constantly reconstituting their forces. They have moved on to a war footing, which Europe has not. Ukraine is obviously on a war footing as well, but the rest of Europe is not on anything even approaching a war footing. We're still at very much just like, elevated peacetime industrial footing.
Peacetime crisis.
Yeah, it's like, and obviously nobody expects that Europe is going to mobilize to the same extent that Ukraine is, because that would not really be sustainable. But there has to be a middle ground, because, as I said, it's still very much trying to have your cake and eat it too. Most European countries, except for those, right on the front line in direct proximity to Russia, like the Baltic states, Finland to some extent, none of the rest of the countries in Europe are really willing to make any real substantial sacrifices to better prepare. And if they continue to take this attitude, then there is very significant risk that Ukraine could maybe lose, and then European countries will actually be in the position where they will have to fight Russia with their own people. Which I don't think anybody wants to happen. But that's the direction we're going in. And this is kind of the point that Cavoli was making in the hearing, that, Russia is in this weird position where they are simultaneously, obviously still failing to defeat Ukraine right now. But they are continually reconstituting. They are on a war footing. The Russian armed forces have improved their combat effectiveness substantially since the war began. They do learn, as much as we like to joke about how they haven't. They absolutely have learned. They have become more lethal and effective, and there is still risk that Ukraine could find itself on the losing end here. Perhaps not a total defeat, but certainly not a good outcome, and that creates significant risk for the rest of Europe. With Russia continuing to posture itself the way that they are. So the optimal outcome remains defeating the Russians in Ukraine, because if they aren't defeated in Ukraine, then Russia absolutely will pose a substantial threat to the rest of Europe.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I think that was a good discussion. I think we all feel pretty much the same about it. And we really hope Europe takes this artillery issue seriously. I think it's kind of a microcosm of some larger things, but this specifically is very serious, and Europe should increase their artillery production. Shout out to Rheinmetall for helping out. I just realized kind of the rest of my news is kind of depressing, I guess. This one's not super depressing, but so there was a report a while ago that there was a naval like intelligence call between the US and Ukraine. And it was like kind of a routine call. And basically they were just supposed to like sort of share information, like what's going on in the Black Sea. You guys see anything? And the allegedly, again, this is a report by a US newspaper, I forget which one, but some reputable news. Someone said off the record that like the naval intelligence call, they said the US side said, "Oh, look, like it's the Moskva," kind of casually, like they just, they thought that Ukraine knew. And Ukraine, assumingly looking at the dot on their radar, just went, "Oh my God, thanks a lot, bye." And they just hung up the phone. And, next thing we know, kablooey, the Moscow goes up. People love the story. I think it was a fun story. But I don't know, like I couldn't speak to the veracity of it, or the publication's sources. But this week, the Ukrainian Navy came out and denied. Oh, it was a New York Times report. Thanks. A New York Times report regarding the strike, and they basically said that no, that didn't happen. The operation was carried out independently. Well, that's what they said. So, I mean, maybe it did happen and they're just being cagey. Sometimes governments do that where they're like, the operation was carried out independently. And what that means is like, it did happen, but we don't want to say it. But it sounds like they're basically denying. So, that would have been fun, but fun story. Ukrainian Navy says it didn't happen. You guys, I assume nothing to say about that. I don't know. It seems not as plausible to me. I think the better story, and probably the truer story, is that the Ukraine, and also I don't think anyone needs help spotting a battleship, to be honest with you. I think the Ukrainians knew where the Moscow. Yeah, I thought so. Okay. Next story is the rest of the stuff's depressing. So Ukraine's GDP growth has slowed to 2.9%. This is after there were some predictions, or I should say, like their quarter to quarter, it had been closer to like 5 to 6%, which was actually pretty good. And that was, I would say, painting a much brighter picture overall for the Ukrainian economy when it was 5 to 6%. The fact that it's now slowing down is probably a result of like Russia's strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure. It's a sign, and also inflation's kind of bad. Ukraine has mostly managed to keep it under control. It's about, I want to say, like 12% right now. Like the central bank's doing a good job, but the point is like Ukraine's economy is not recovering from what's going on. They're managing to like handle the blows, but it doesn't look like the economy can get its way out of this during the war. Whereas before, I would say that it was maybe possible that Ukraine could expand their economy a little bit, and that would help them with the war. So I don't know. That's a little bit of a depressing news, but hopefully the Europeans and European integration will help improve the Ukrainian economic picture in the future. Do you guys have any thoughts about like the Ukrainian economy? What's going on? I did my best to cover broadly what's going on with the Russian economy. I think it's sort of the same old, same old. They're overheating their economy. They're going all in on war economy. They're definitely like eating away at the fat. They've eaten away at the fat of their economy, and now they're burning muscle, and eventually they'll get to bone. But like we're not there yet. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting. But if you guys had any thoughts about just kind of overall the economies we're looking at?
Yep. Nothing more to say from my side.
Yeah, maybe if Lauren wants to talk about it later, we will. Okay, and then next one is Turkstream and Slovakia. So Slovakia has agreed to import a bunch of new natural gas through the Turkstream pipeline. This is something also, I don't know, like all this to say Europe did a pretty good job of getting rid of Russian gas, or getting rid of their dependency on Russian gas, right when the full-scale invasion started. There's been like over the last year or so, like a steady creep on very specific countries, France, and then certain other ones like Hungary and Slovakia and others, but really France and Belgium, I think also, and Spain maybe. I don't know. There's like a couple countries in Western Europe that are using Turkstream, and basically what's going on is the gas is sort of getting rebranded. So like Russia sells it to someone, and then I want to say Azerbaijan, and then Azerbaijan sells it on or something. And so like there's been a larger and larger quantity of Russian gas kind of sneaking into Europe. I don't know. This is a problem. Like it's, $20 billion or something like that of money. And a lot of that goes right into the Russian budget. And most of, I want to say like almost half or more than half of the Russian budget is their military. So this is not quite, but maybe to wrap our heads around this as little, human beings, like sort of like half that money is going directly to the Russian military, or maybe a third of it or something. So yeah, this gas issue, I don't know, is a really big issue strategically. It seems like the Turk Stream pipeline, this whole concept needs to be covered in new European sanctions. And these countries like Slovakia and like Hungary and like others that have basically been as you guys know, I want to say it's the Druzhba pipeline. There was a contract between Ukraine and Russia, literally while the war was going on, that Russia was transiting gas through Ukraine. And that eventually expired, and Ukraine was like, no, we're not going to renew that contract. And of course, countries like Slovakia threw a tantrum. So now they've solved that problem with this Turk Stream solution. And certain countries like France are like, oh, this Turk Stream is cool. So that's my concern, is like shutting down Turk Stream and or at least Russian gas through it, I should say. And what I think Europe needs to pay more attention to this issue, because it's a pretty serious issue in terms of importing energy from Russia. It needs to stop.
Agreed.
Yeah. Just a rant, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's kind of interesting because in the latest federal press conference on Monday, I believe on Wednesday and Friday was cancelled. They actually spoke about or it was the week before. Anyway, last week or this week, one of the federal press conferences, they actually spoke about Russian gas and other resources like flowing still into Germany. And I mean, it's I kind of see the issue, because from one side we say we don't buy anything directly anymore. The other side is when we, for example, have a contract with buying in, let's say, the Netherlands, right? And there's gas coming onto the Netherlands, and you can't see know from a chemical standpoint, right? And see, yeah, that gas is coming from Russia. That must be Russian gas. It get mixed, right? And there was a long debate about it. And it was something along the lines like, guys, what do you want us to do when we are buying in France, or when we are buying in the Netherlands or in the US or whatever, and they buy Russian gas, if they know it or not? It's like, of course, it funds the Russian war economy, but it isn't our fault. And how should we know? I like. It's really difficult, right? Like when you know and you still buy it and you say, okay, it's not our fault when they are buying it. I kind of see the point. But
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, it's a
yeah,
complicated problem, right? Like, so for the Netherlands, right, to put it into context, as far as I understand, earlier, like let's say 40 years ago, they had gas fields. And so they built a bunch of industries, like chemical industries and stuff, kind of around that. And then, the gas fields kind of dried up, or like basically for maybe economic or environmental reasons, they decided not to, like, extract more gas. And so all these chemical industries are in the Netherlands going, well, we need gas. And so they look around and they're like, well, Russia's the only place we can get it. And they do it. And then you guys, of course, being a consumer at a different point on the supply chain, are just like, well, we just need gas. Like, we're going to get it from the Netherlands. Like, where else are we going to do it? You know what I mean? Like, kind of everyone's just a cog in the machine. And like, it's difficult for anyone to step back and say, well, look, if everyone's taking individual steps here, but the end result is Russia getting, billions of dollars, right? And to persecute their criminal war in Ukraine. So that's it's not, I'm not suggesting any single country is to blame here, but it's part of the issue of like a complicated world economy. It's definitely measures should be taken to address it. And I think probably the best institution for that, looking at what we have to work with, is the EU, right? The EU is a bigger fish that can say, no, we've got to apply some rules here and think about the larger interests of all of the, people involved, something like that.
yeah, I agree. And it's just interesting because it's a reoccurring issue. And I just see it from a German standpoint, because other countries besides Ukraine don't, interest me that way, or I'm not following that carefully. But maybe it was last year or 2023, they already had the same discussion just about crude oil. And if I recall correctly, we were buying a lot from or some from India. while India was importing like 40% of it, like all the oil in their country was like from Russia. And there was a big discussion about, when you know that a large share of their oil is actually from Russia and you're buying from India, like you're financing the Russian war machine still, even though you're not buying from Russia directly. And it's the same thing. They're saying like, yeah, we don't want to buy from Russia. We're buying from India, and we're just basically hope that we get the other 60%, not the 40%. Yeah, it's really bad. Sorry.
Oh no, it's good. Colby, anything I understand you're. Doesn't sound like you're interested in talking economics today, which is totally fine.
No, I have nothing to add to the current topic.
I would add, just like I was just thinking when you mentioned that, like I kind of implied it in the news report, but like Trump has actually committed a great deal of economic damage to Russia. He basically appears to have triggered a global recession, which will cause a decrease in energy demand, which has already happened, which has lowered oil prices, which will greatly impact the Russian budget. He has created enough uncertainty in the Russian economy that it has caused the equivalent of damage of the full-scale mobilization of Russia, which happened, in 2023. Like, I want to say, I was trying to think of an analogy. It's the equivalent of like disemboweling yourself and then like ruining your enemy's favorite shirt because of it. But I don't know, just kind of a weird accomplishment that he had, I think, this week, causing a great deal of turmoil in Russia. By like, it looks like global energy demand is going to go down a little bit, and that will be good for keeping the Russian economy in check. That really hurts them when that happens. So anyway, that was some good economic stuff. Hopefully our colleague Lorem Ipsum will be here soon to talk economics a little more. And then my last item this week is just the current state of the ceasefire negotiations. It's still a complete mess is my summary of it. Again, like I do my best through the whole week to I read, a bunch of news stories about it. I listen to the statements from all the different countries, and I'm still trying to answer the basic question. Like, is there a ceasefire in place? Has anyone violated the ceasefire? Like, is anyone currently observing the ceasefire, and so on and so forth? I would say right now, the answer is it's a complete mess. You're getting different statements from different parties at different times, and it seems completely dependent on which answer is the most like favorable to them at the time. So in other words, if you ask Russia if the ceasefire is in place when they did something, they're like, we haven't agreed to anything. What are you talking about? If you ask Russia if the ceasefire is in place when something gets hit in their country, they're like, yes, Ukraine violated the ceasefire, right? And the U.S. has at varying times said, we're optimistic about negotiations for the ceasefire. And they've also said, the ceasefire's in place, you guys need to knock it off, right? So it's just totally unclear to me. Ukraine, I would say, of all the countries, appears to be the most consistent and rational when it comes to treating the ceasefire like it's a real thing. And the reason I say that is there haven't been any strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, to my knowledge, since the ceasefire. And those strikes instead have been other targets. And they were mentioned in my news report. They hit the only fiber optic cable plant in Russia. That's not energy infrastructure. They hit a missile stockpile that hits their infrastructure. That's not hitting infrastructure, right? So like Ukraine has been trying to get smart about targeting and still get good effects without hitting Russian energy infrastructure. And I don't even think they are doing that because they're naive and like, oh, the ceasefire will work. I think it's a message to Russia saying, we'll still play the US's stupid games here and we'll still hurt you. Like we'll show you right now, we can still adhere to the ceasefire and cause a lot of damage. That's my take on it, but I don't know. What do you guys think about? Do you have a different understanding of the current situation when it comes to the ceasefire? Or do you want to talk about any of the weird statements that have been made by any of the sides or anything like that?
Well, I don't have a other standpoint on the ceasefire, if it exists or not. But I would say that it's more a statement towards the US and not towards Russia. Because, if it's real or not, when they're acknowledging it and when they're acting accordingly, like not striking energy infrastructure, for example, it's really more a statement towards Trump that it's not there or not Ukraine is the issue in these things. Russia is, right? And I don't think that Ukraine really gives a shit about what Russia thinks, right? So I think it's more a statement towards the Trump administration to point out, to highlight again and again and again that Russia breaks its words, that Russia is the unreliable part in it, but with which is, everyone knows it, but apparently for the orange guy in the White House, you have to point it out, like hold it in front of his face. I don't know that who is the bad guy. So yeah, just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think it's a totally valid reading too. It makes sense, makes complete logical sense. But yeah, I think both of us, I would say, agree, regardless of which reading, that like Ukraine has been pretty clever about managing to navigate the issue, right? Like, in other words, they've chosen some good targets and they've hit them, and they're doing like the attacks on the energy infrastructure have been very effective. Like, you guys know, I cover that every week. And they're big attacks. You see the footage. You see the disruptions to the Russian economy that they cause. They have to shut down production. They cause huge fires. Like, it's a big deal. But it's impressive to me that even without hitting those facilities, Ukraine still, it looked like for about a week, I want to say last week, my report was a little light when it came to the strikes, but they kind of redirected their efforts, and then they figured out, how to hit stuff. And now they're hitting other stuff. And so, I don't know, to me, that's just impressive. I will say energy infrastructure still seems like a more optimal target. It would definitely benefit Ukraine if Western countries stopped meddling in that field. It still looks like, the quote unquote Black Sea ceasefire would be to like Russia's benefit. Like, Ukraine has mostly won in that area. Although, Ukrainian shippers, if you ask them, do they want like a ceasefire? They're like, yeah. So it wouldn't be complete loss for Ukraine, but it seems like this energy ceasefire would maybe be beneficial for Ukraine. Like, Russia is hitting infrastructure, but it's just a question of like, can it actually be enforced? And is the U.S. serious about making a real ceasefire where the rules apply to both sides? And I don't know. It doesn't look to be the case. And so far, I don't know. The statements coming out of the US are pretty conflicting, I would say. Like, Colby, it seems like this week they've said that their patience is running out with Russia. That seems to be the general. It seems like they're trying to nudge Russia into the ceasefire. Would you kind of agree with that, or would you
I don't think that they've done anything really to push the Russians to agree to the ceasefire so far. We haven't really seen them deploy any attempts to wield American leverage to get Russia to the negotiating table in good faith. I mean, they're just trying to negotiate a deal with a obviously disinterested party, and now they're showing some initial appreciation of the fact that the Russians, are disinterested and are getting frustrated by this, but we haven't yet seen them really do anything to try and change Russian behavior. There was the decision to not renew the sanctions waiver on financial transactions for Russia's energy industry, but I don't know how much that is impacting yet. This is something that it would be interesting to get the perspective of our economics experts on, because I don't know a whole lot about the minutia of international energy markets. So I'd be curious if they're hearing anything about what impact that's having on Russian revenue so far. But beyond that one sort of sanctions policy decision, I wouldn't say that the Trump administration has really done much of anything to try and change Russian behavior or impose costs on them for their behavior so far. So we're hearing that they're considering, as you said, there's consideration of additional secondary sanctions on Russia's energy industry, which would be quite significant. But we haven't seen any sort of decision implemented there so far. And obviously, there's been no decision really on strengthening Ukraine's position with more security assistance. And those are the two obvious things that should and would need to be done if you want to try and get the Russians to change their willingness to negotiate in good faith.